What's up, guys? Kwasi for Kwasi Media and Kwasi Animations. Welcome to Kwasi Animation Studios. Check this out. On screen you have, excuse me, my character Leviticus of Gilda, son of Daga, from the series Rise of the Darulians, and he is a character that I created, that I extracted the model pieces from Xenoverse 2, Dragon Ball Xenoverse 2. The series is not a Dragon Ball series, but I don't model characters, and I'm not gonna lie to you, I don't intend to learn. I use a program called Make Human to make more realistic characters. So there you go with that. Now, today we're gonna talk about render settings, and we're gonna talk about render engines. In Blender, you have two, really three, but the third one is really more about workflow and working between two different systems. Okay, so you have Eevee, which we are presently in, and we are in the actual render view. So this is wireframe, this is solid, this is material preview, and this is render view. And then we have cycles. Okay, so now the settings that we have in our settings, we have a sample setting, which is render for 64 samples in Eevee, and you can do it higher. You can do it higher, but it really makes no difference because this is real time. So the shader that you have is going to be seen when you hit, let's say you hit F12. So if you go to your render settings, and so like your output properties, you have your resolution 1920 by 1080 at 100%. And most of you are going to be on PNG, right? Or in my case, it's PNGA, which gives you an alpha channel. So say you're going to do this you're going to render as a video, it'll come out as a render sequence. I mean a PNG sequence, and if you were going to render it out as an FMmpeg video, it's going to just render it all at one time as one video. But we're going to go to PNG because I'm going to do a couple of renders to let you see the difference. I'm going to hit render and let you see what it looks like between Eevee and Cycle. So the video, I'll try to make it short as I possibly can, but that's how we're going to go about it. Okay, so with that being said, you can change your resolution or the size of your resolution, because I'm saying this 100% is the scale of the resolution. Okay, so it's not necessarily change the resolution in reference to detail, but just the scale. Like I can do it at 30%, and when I hit F12, that's how small the image is going to be. Okay, but it's still the same resolution. You see that? So if I do it at 100 and I hit F12, and it took 2 seconds, and that's the resolution at 1080p. Okay, so again, up here, this three, you see render presets, you have render presets, and you can pick which one and go up to 4K. Okay, so we're just going to keep it at where it is right now because I just want to show you the difference between the two. So these are your render settings. Now understand, if you're going to do it if you have a video and it has audio in it, it's a render sequence, you actually going to have to do it as an FMmpeg video, and then you go down to encoding here in the container, MP4 if you want to use that, and then you have your codecs, your quality, your speed. I usually say just keep those the same. Then you have audio, and then you would hit audio what type you want, MP3 or whatever. I use ACC, so because it gives me 2 channels, and you can use that if you so choose to. Now, however, since so I'm just showing you how certain things look. This is what we're rendering with. Sorry for the background noise. Got a freaking idiot decided to show up in front of my house with all this noise, just being retarded. Okay, so with this being said, now we're going to look at cycles. This is Eevee, and understand I have a sun in here, so when I turn the sun off, it goes completely dark. So I'm going to show you Eevee. This is Eevee. Now remember, we have 64 samples being rendered. So this is the number of samples per pixel for rendering. Okay, you can raise it up to whatever you want it to be. If you want to do 4,000 samples, you can, but it's going to take a grip of time to render. And the viewport is showing at 16, but I can go up to 64. You can't even tell that I changed it. It just that's Eevee for you. However, cycles is different, and you have 2 different ways to render in cycles. Okay, so I'm going to show you those 2 ways. Go into edit, go to preferences, and what you're going to do is you're going to go to say editing. No, it's not editing. Slow down, think about it. The interface, which one is it? Oh my god, I'm sorry y'all, system. All right, so when you go to system, you'll see cycles render devices. You can do it as again, CUDA, which would be, you can pick your GPU or your CPU, optics, which is a particular OptiX comes with a particular GPU, and then OpenCL, which comes with a particular GPU. I'm using CUDA because that's what I have. All right, so I have CUDA cores. I can't remember how many I have. So that's what that's for. All right, so that's pretty much how that goes. All right, so now let's go to Eevee. We're gonna click cycles and watch the difference. See how that looks? That's the CPU, and I'm gonna come in here and it's said that it's done. All right, but the viewport for cycles, see the difference how cycles looks. So that means I have to go in and make adjustments for cycles to get it to look the way I had it in Eevee. Okay, now when I went GPU, it changed again because this is the only thing in the scene. All right, when you look at cycles, this pause preview shows up, and I can pause the preview or I can hit the preview. So it's at 32 samples. Yeah, I'm sorry, viewport samples are at 32 and the render is at 128. So we're gonna go 128 for in here. Now you realize the black kind of coming off blue in that light, right? So we'll turn off the light and come back. So what's happening here is I have to go and make adjustments in cycles for the camera to notice the character. Anytime I move, it's gonna go to try to see him again, and it's gonna always change it because it's trying to see him, okay? So every time you make an adjustment, it's gonna always change. It's gonna do this every time, but you realize that the black is now no longer black. Okay, so what's happening is cycles is looking at the shader, it's bottom shader. So if I go into shading and I do it in cycles, when I look at my anime shader, the white is brighter than the black. So if I bring the white down, see what happened there when I bring the white down and I bring the black up. So now I have to go see what I have to do in there. I have to change it. Now, if I want that same way, I want it to be the way I had it, I have to go in and change it. There we go. All right, so same thing here. Same thing happened here. I have to go in and change it because the white is brighter in cycles. Cycles is looking at the actual occlusions and how deep those occlusions are. All right, there we go. So when I go back to my layout, now our black is back black again. But realize that the scene is not as bright. That's because of here. So we're gonna beef the scene up. Let's say, let's go 2. We'll go 2, and here I'll go to RGB, and I put in 0.2. All right, and I'll make it a bluish color. Yeah, let's go to almost bluish color. All right, so this is what cycles looks like. Okay, and it'll come out cool when you want to do like an anime thing or whatever, but understand it's gonna take forever to render. Let me show you what I mean. When I hit F12, look at the difference. It's rendering it out. See, it's not, Eevee wasn't going like that. Eevee just showed you the image, but it also had the textures look different. Cycles looks different from Eevee, and it can look better. This is not bad. This actually looks more like what my guy, all-time great, my boy Kevin, big ups, was saying he wanted to see. But the problem with doing this is it has to render out. Realize the other one was like 2 seconds, this was 12 seconds. Now, if I bump this up to like 4K or bump the samples up, let's say I bump the samples up to, let's say 512 for the render and hit F12, it's gonna take longer to render out now. See that? So that's really the thing here, is that if you wanted to render faster and you still want to maintain all of the work you put into your shaders, because in cycles you have to use compositing. This is a great base for my character. So if I want to make all of those little details show up, what I need to do is now go into the compositor and add those details. We're using other nodes. There's a lot of pieces to using cycles, which is fine if you're doing like a large production and you have a year to work on it. Cool, you do that. But if you're trying to put out projects every week, or you're trying to do something, Eevee is the way to go. And a lot of people use Eevee to actually put out their content. But this looks fine, but it's just slow compared to Eevee. But when I was in Eevee, now I have to go into my shader again and change my shader back to the way I had it. All right, we'll push it down, go back to where we had it. Okay, so I had it like right a bit here. I think this one here will go 0.003. Okay, so, and then on this one, same thing. Push it back some. because what Cycles was doing was seeing it for what it was. Okay, so there we are. Now we have our anime shader back where we wanted it. I'm gonna go back to the layout and hit save. I'm gonna hit F12, and we're in Eevee, and there it is. Now, if you look at this, all of this where you see the highlights, Cycles didn't show that, did it? Cycles didn't show those little details that are cut in with that. I'm not saying Cycles is bad, I'm saying it just showed, it got rid of that occlusion because I had to come back and add that as a pass. And I'm gonna show you what I mean. When I go into Cycles, I only had to go into Cycles. Here in the view layer properties, it shows you the passes. See here it says passes data. And it will show, and so you have diffuse, color, light, specular, your specular, diffuse, your volume, other. When you go into Cycles, it actually uses the same deal. So when I go into Cycles, I have to go into the passes, and then I have to select which passes I want for like the lighting, a cryptomat. If I use that, that's a whole nother thing. The data, if I'm using mists, what's the vectors, the normals. There's a lot of complexities to using Cycles when you use passes, because then you go into the compositing tab, and then you will bring the character in here from whatever render you had. All right, so, and you would use this pass data to adjust your character. So now the glossy parts of the character, I would have to actually select these and then render that. Okay, and that's the thing that a lot of people, reason why a lot of people really use Eevee now, because I don't have to do that in Eevee, because when in Eevee, all I have to do is render out because all of my passes are together. And it can take time depending on how many samples I have. So say I bump this up to 512 in the render and I hit F12. It's gonna take a little while longer. Why? Because I bumped up my resolution to 512 samples. So now it's gonna take a little bit longer to actually render this out. So now it may take a minute or so to render this out because I bumped it up. But how much different is it? Now it took 14 seconds, but how much different was it from the last one? You see what I'm saying? So what your key here is, when you're, now understand, when you're rendering out particle systems, you're rendering out actual, let's see, particle systems, you're rendering out volume, you're rendering out a lot of things, excuse me, in your scene, it's going to slow it down. So it's not going to be as fast. And that's really the thing that you want to look out for right there. So the best render settings are more about what you have in your scene and understanding how to balance out your scene so that your scene renders out quickly. But if you're using Cycles, no matter what you have in your scene, it's going to take time. Eevee is faster. Eevee is going to give you seconds. It could take a minute to render something out, but it's also depending on how many textures you have, how much resolution you're using. If you're rendering at a higher render, you see it took 14 seconds at 512. Okay, so if I render this at 64, which is fine, which is more than enough, then I don't have the issue. Okay, like a good example. I'll show you an example real quick and then I'll be done. All right, so let's go into my verses, and I'm a series I have called verses, and we're gonna go into one of the, I'm going to the wrong thing. We're gonna go into one of the animations that I have presently. Let's go to this one. Okay, so this animation I have presently, this is again in Eevee. This is what it looks like, and I'm rendering mine at 50%, so to go even faster. All right, so when we hit play,
This should do it. Shut up.
okay, so with that being said, you see what it looks like. You see how the speed for which it moves. So let's say if I want to take a picture of him right now and I hit F12. Okay, because of what's in the scene, it still took 2 seconds. And these two images match. And there's a little bit more definition in this versus this one because it's a full render. Okay, and that's really what this is all about. So a lot of people, so a lot of times what happens is you have people thinking that thinking that Eevee is not as good, but Eevee is as good as you make it. So it's really about you. So with that being said, man, I apologize. You're hearing all the background noise. Like I said, some people visiting or whatever, and they're acting silly, they've been drinking and stuff. So I apologize for that noise. But for the most part, I hope that I explained something for you. And when you want to render, you can either go to the render button and press render animation, or you can hit Control 12 if you're rendering an animation. If you want to render an image, hit F12. Now understand, if you're just trying to do something to see something real quick, there's also what they call a viewport render. So there's a render here, it says viewport render underneath view. When you click view, viewport render and viewport render animation. Okay, so you can do the same thing there if you want to use it. If you're trying to do something, you're just trying to do what they call a play blast if you're doing an animation. If you're just doing an image, then just hit F12 because it doesn't make a difference because it's not going to save it until you go into image and save image as, okay? And then you save it to whatever folder you want to save it to. So number love from this side, man. Hope you had a good time.